Eternals Assemble! Marvel's Eternals is an epic superhero tale that shows off the scale of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, redefining what we know about its past, present, and future. Directed by Chloe Zhao, this movie definitely establishes an even bigger threat than Thanos and his magic bedazzled oven mitt or whatever that thing was. And we'll break all that down in a second, plus we'll get into some literally massive changes this movie brings to the MCU, but before we get to all that, we have to warn you we are about to spoil everything about this movie and where we think this is all headed, so if you haven't seen it yet or you just don't want to know, now is the time to Superman your way on out of here until we are done. Okay, now that we're past the spoiler warning, let's get right to that ending. 5 years after surviving Thanos and his whole Infinity Stone situation, the entire planet Earth was nearly wiped out anyway, as the deviants almost caused a Celestial to be born out of the center of the Earth, which would have just obliterated everything and everyone on board. But thanks to the Eternals, or at least most of the Eternals, this massive catastrophe was mostly averted. I say mostly because there's still part of a Celestial's head and hand now sticking out of the MCU's Earth, which is a little odd. Now that's a lot to lay on you all at once, so let me recap a little bit and show you how we wound up there. As advertised, the Eternals are a group of immortal superhuman god androids who've been living in secret with humans on Earth for like 7,000 years. Their purpose? To protect humans and Earth from the deviants, which are a bunch of nasty space monsters who feed on the energy generated by living things. Anyway, here's the squad. Cersei, who's the protagonist of this movie, Icarus, Ajak, Kingo, Sprite, Phastos, Makkari, Druig, Thena, and Gilgamesh. Who created / put them there? Arishem the Judge, one of the few surviving Celestials in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The Eternals serve Arishem, and at the start of the film, Ajak is the lead Eternal who communicates with him directly. After she's discovered dead in the movie's first act, Cersei is selected as the new leader of the Eternals. It's not Icarus, but there's a really good reason why. Stick with us, and we'll get to that in a second.
Why didn't you guys help fight Thanos? Or any war, or all the other terrible things throughout history?
So if you're wondering why these superpowered Eternals didn't show up to stop Thanos from wiping out half of all of life in the universe, here's the explanation.
We were instructed not to interfere in any human conflicts unless deviants are involved.
And while Thanos might have the deviant syndrome in the comics, the film makes it clear he isn't a deviant in the MCU. Or wasn't, I guess. Anyway, the setup. The Eternals are all off living their own lives when Ajak brings them together and informs them that a cataclysmic event known as the emergence will happen and wipe out the Earth if they don't stop it in 7 days. If you hadn't guessed it yet, the emergence would be when a Celestial is born, destroying the Earth at the same time. And why did this happen at this particular point? The blip! For Celestials to be born, there's a huge amount of energy required, and when half the Earth's population blipped back into existence, thanks to the Avengers' efforts at Endgame, that created the energy necessary for a frickin' Celestial to hatch out of the center of the Earth like a massive apocalyptic baby chicken. Through the film, the deviants work to ensure the emergence happens so they can launch a conquest through the universe, feeding on energy and destroying worlds with the help of a newborn Celestial. In the comics, the Eternals aren't androids, but whenever one of them dies, they always seem to come back. I mean, it's comics, so everybody kind of does that, but returning to action after dying seems specifically to be one of the perks of being an Eternal. I mean, they're called Eternals. It would be kind of false advertising otherwise. So who killed Ajak? Well, technically the deviants, but that might not have happened if Icarus hadn't tossed her off a cliff Game of Thrones style. That's right, Icarus is so deeply indoctrinated as an immortal space android that he's willing to fight his own team, or at least feed them to space wolves. Anyway, in the end, the remaining Eternals, including Icarus, join consciousness in what Phastos calls a Unimind, and which Kingo calls a brainstorm, to defeat the deviants and stop the emergence, but not before a Celestial's head poked out of the Indian Ocean just a skoonch. Then the Celestial Arishem also takes 3 of the remaining Eternals off to somewhere? We don't know where, but they're gone. And when the credits roll, we see that the Eternals will return, though the movie's producer Nate Moore recently said a sequel isn't a must-have, so make of that what you will. And yes, there was a mid- and post-credit scene as per usual with a Marvel Studios movie. They introduced Harry Styles as Thanos' brother Eros, aka Starfox, Patton Oswalt as Pip the Troll, and the voice of Mahershala Ali as Blade. And there's plenty to unpack there, and we'll get to it, so sit tight. Let's kick this segment off with some sex. Okay, let me explain. Eternals features the first honest-to-goodness sex scene in the MCU. And yes, it's been implied before, and even Cap and Peggy had their whole talk of dancing, which kind of hinted at it, but this movie actually features a real, physically intimate moment between 2 Marvel superheroes, and here's what director Chloe Zhao told us about it.
It's a very mature love story, and we wanted to show them physically loving each other. And obviously we wanted to do it in a way that really communicate love. And then once we put it together, we did show Disney, and they were right away, they thought it was really beautiful.
The scene also underscores the fact that even though they're androids, Cersei and Icarus' love for each other was very real, and it lasted for like 5 millennia. When we meet them at the beginning of the film, they are separated, living their own lives on Earth just like the other Eternals, and Cersei is starting a relationship with Dick Whitman. Dane Whitman. Sorry, did I just say Dick Whitman? My bad. I just always think about that guy.
I don't think about you at all.
Ouch! Rude. Also of note, Phastos now holds the distinction of being the first gay superhero in the MCU. He shares a tender moment and a kiss with his husband and family before having to go help the world not get exploded. Anyway, once Icarus turns out to be the bad guy, he's basically an evil Superman, except he's not really evil, he's just so heavily indoctrinated and programmed by Arishem to the point that he's not able to accept the Eternals' new mission to stop the emergence. Until the very last minute when he joins the Unimind to stop the thing from happening, and once that's done, Icarus makes Icarus from Greek mythology and literally flies too close to the sun, or rather, directly into it. And it looks like he destroys himself, and of course, we don't see a body, which, I mean, of course not, but remember, he is also an immortal space android, so there's always a chance he could come back. It's a comic book movie after all. So once the emergence is stopped and Arishem makes off with Cersei, Kingo, and Phastos, the remaining Eternals on Earth are Makkari, Sprite, Druig, and Thena. Now that we've covered the ending, let's talk about those post-credit scenes, which you've probably already read about because it takes less time to post on Reddit than it does for us to make these videos, but thank you for watching nonetheless. Anyway, starting with the post-credit scene at the very end, the MCU's Blade is here. Marvel Studios announced back at Comic-Con 2019 that Mahershala Ali would play Blade in the MCU, and Blade definitely shows up in this movie. Well, he makes himself heard in this movie. We are, of course, referring to the post-credit scene where Kit Harington's Dane Whitman is checking out an ancient-looking sword, and he's about to pick it up, but before he does, we hear a disembodied voice from off-screen, and it says, "Are you sure you want to do that, Mr. Whitman?" He doesn't say it quite like that because it's Mahershala Ali, but you get the idea. And then it cuts to black. Immediately after watching it, viewers will be asking themselves, is that who I thought it was? And according to director Chloe Zhao, yeah, it was.
I can confirm is Mr. Blade himself.
So that is Blade watching this man about to become the Black Knight, a hero from Marvel Comics, and if you're curious about him and what's coming in the future for Kit Harington's Dane Whitman, check out our explainer about that, which gets real deep into it. The Black Knight, the sword, the whole deal. We will link you to that at the end, so stick around for that. Anyway, Blade's involvement here is obviously an early setup for an MCU Blade solo film. No release date for that yet, but production is expected to start in 2022. We've got a video where we dive a bit deeper into Blade's proper MCU introduction, so hang out till the end, and we'll share that link as well. But of course, this is an MCU film, so you know there's not just the one special scene after the main titles roll. In the first post-credit scene, we're introduced to 2 new characters. Harry Styles appears as Thanos' brother Eros, aka Starfox from the comics, and Patton Oswalt joins him as Pip the Troll. We've got an explainer video about that scene too, so hang out with us till the end. We'll link you to all sorts of fun videos. Anyway, these post-credit scenes seem to be sending the MCU off into a few different ways at once. Obviously, introducing Pip the Troll and Starfox once again sends the story off into space, where the MCU is sending us more and more these days. And of course, at the same time, Dane Whitman is about to become Black Knight, who's basically a medieval superhero, so a lot of his action will likely be based on Earth, and the same is true with Blade, the Daywalker, unless all of a sudden the MCU throws us space vampires or something. And of course, now it's time for the Easter eggs we found in Marvel's Eternals. Here's what we got. Look, up in the sky, wait, Superman? In a Marvel movie? That's right, Icarus speaks pretty directly about his very Superman-adjacent powers, mentioning the big blue Boy Scout by name, as if everybody's favorite Kryptonian from Kansas exists in the MCU as a fictional character. This sounds like something we need to ask Kevin Feige about next time we get the chance.
Why, you're the very model of sanity. Oh, by the way, I've pressed your tights and put away your exploding gas balls.
But Supes isn't the only DC character to get referenced. There's also a Batman reference when Kingo's valet Karun is basically called Alfred to Kingo's Batman. And speaking of classic superheroes, an Eternals dinner conversation focuses on Earth's mightiest heroes, with Icarus volunteering to lead the Avengers in the absence of Tony, Thor, and Steve Rogers.
So now that Captain Rogers and Iron Man are both gone, who do you think's gonna lead the Avengers?
I could lead them.
The blip plays a pretty big role in this movie, as it served as the catalyst for the emergence. Beyond that, there's a subtle reference to the post-blip repatriation efforts we saw in action during the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Patton Oswalt might have the record for most Marvel characters to be played by one person. On top of Pip the Troll and recently voicing MODOK in the Hulu series, he also played Hedges back in Blade Trinity, and he technically portrayed 5 different characters on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. since he was not one, but all of the Koenig brothers. Eternals has more than a few Game of Thrones references, which you might have seen coming when they cast Robb Stark and Jon Snow in 2 of the main roles. Also, her name is Cersei, not to mention Kit Harington's character, is about to take up a mythical sword and fulfill his destiny, of course, before Blade stops him. What do you know, from White Walkers to Daywalkers.
Go on, let's have a look.
At what?
The sword! Show us the sword! 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 Sword!
The sword Dane Whitman almost picked up? Most likely it's the Ebony Blade, a mythical weapon forged from a meteorite by Merlin and the sword's original wielder, Sir Percy of Scandia. In the comics, the Ebony Blade is kind of like the opposite of Thor's hammer Mjolnir, as it can only be wielded by the impure of heart, which is odd because Jon Snow just seems so nice. And of course, speaking of Thor, Kingo references the strongest Avenger, saying that he knew Thor back in the day, which is kind of cute. What did you think of Marvel's Eternals, and how is that huge celestial head going to affect the MCU's Earth, aside from probably really screwing up shipping routes? And how is Blade connected to the Black Knight, aside from breaking into his house and telling him not to touch things? Let's hear your theories down in the comments. Anyway, thanks for watching this episode of Canon Fodder. For more Marvel, here is the link to the Black Knight explainer video we mentioned. We'll put the link to the other one in the comments below. And of course, for more on the ever-expanding MCU, don't forget to follow and subscribe to IGN wherever you like to watch.